One of the most challenging economic blocks within our world is growth. Since becoming the world's most powerful countries after the World Wars, the United States has acted more boldly to interfere in the internal affairs of other countries to keep its hegemony. The US does this, among other things, by using economic pressure to repress its opponents. So in this video, I will talk about how Japan's blooming economic growth in the 1980s and 90s was absolutely shattered by United States' hegemonic financial power and how this relates to China today. Back in the 1980s, Japan was portrayed as the greatest economic threat to the United States. While America's heavy industry waned, unemployment rates surged and national economy staggered. Japanese product swept over consumers' electronic and automobile markets. Animosity seeped from the political and economic spheres to mass media and popular culture, leading to an intense wave of Japan bashing.
We're letting some country who we beat in the war, they don't have to bomb us anymore because they own everything.
America is being ripped off, and I'll tell you what, we're not going to have an America in 10 years if it keeps going like this. We're a debtor nation, and we have to tax, we have to tariff, we have to protect this country, and nobody's doing it.
For Congresswoman Helen Bentley, the Japanese went too far when they bought a minor league ball team.
Baseball is America's pastime, and now the Japanese are in the ballpark, in the stands, ready to take the field. When will the umpires call foul?
Signs banning foreign Japanese cars were erected in the parking lots, and imported vehicles from Honda, Toyota, and Nissan were vandalized. As Japanese economy was projected to surpass the US economy, so did anti-Japanese propaganda. The US-Japan conflict of the 1980s, which was centered on Japan's rising economic prowess and America's alleged declining hegemony, led to a rising resentment towards the nation and its people. This serves as the ideal lens to analyze the current US-China trade conflict, which I will go over later in this video. In 1987, a group of congressmen smashed Toshiba products on Capitol Hill. This anti-Japanese violence, supported by the people and by the government, spilled over to the Asian Americans community at large. It was so bad that a Chinese man named Vincent Chin was brutally beaten to death with a baseball bat days before his wedding just because he looked Japanese. Both men who killed Vincent Chin, Ronald Ebbins and Michael Nitz, were eventually cleared of all significant charges. His mother, Lily Chin, won both civil suits. She was awarded $1.5 million. This money represented the projected loss of income from Vincent Chin's senior engineering position, as well as Lily Chin's loss of her son, an incredibly small value for a young man's life. The murderers who got out of jail didn't even pay their fines to the victim's family, so the $1.5 million was only on paper. They only paid a total of $3,000 after 10 years. So, Vincent's two murderers blamed him, a Chinese American, for the decline of the American auto industry. Since Japanese cars were superior, they were better made and more affordable, a fact that is still true to this day. His death is so important because his circumstances echo into the present, and his death can teach us about the future of Asian and Asian American. It's a reminder that despite any citizenship, we're seen as our ethnicity first and everything else second, just like Vincent Chin. This has never been truer than ever, especially in the last 3 years, as racist attacks against Asians have risen exponentially. In the US alone, over 11,000 hate incidents have occurred against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders since the start of the COVID pandemic. These hate incidents, or racist attacks on Asians, they can all be traced, in large part, to the anti-Asian rhetoric used at the beginning of the pandemic, including that by a former President Donald Trump, who referred to the coronavirus as the Chinese virus.
Why do you keep calling this the Chinese virus, then?
Because it comes from China.
Racist.
It's not racist at all, no, not at all. It comes from China. That's why. It comes from China. I want to be accurate. Yeah, please, John, please.
Once again, supported by the government and by the people. As soon as this call out from the White House happened, everybody Asian American knew that this would land very hard on us here in America, just like it did in the 1980s. Then came the allegations of Japan's intellectual property theft in America, a way of vilification and justification, accusing Japan of picking America's brains and using it for their own economic success. Does this sound familiar to you? This is incredibly interesting to me because a lot of the propaganda you see against China is very much similar to the propaganda you see towards Japan in the 80s. If you fast forward 30 years later today, that same stories repeat itself. But this time, American have made another Asian country, China, the villain. When, just like 3 decades ago, they should be looking squarely in the mirror. So, allegations of intellectual property theft, but also currency manipulation, state-sponsored industrial policy, a hollowing out of U.S. manufacturing, and an outsized bilateral trade deficit. The way people are writing negative stuff about China now is so much like how they used to target Japan in the 80s. Japan was even a democracy and a major U.S. ally, but it's like they're following a similar script. So if you think about this lack of democracy in China is just an excuse to attack China. If China is not a communist but a democracy, but is still on the current economic trajectory, the US would still attack China like it does now. The Western world order would find another excuse to galvanize its citizens and other countries to attack an Eastern economic superpower, just like it did to Japan in the 80s. Japan's only mistake seemed to be growing too fast and standing a bit too tall for the liking of the Western lead world order, and it paid the ultimate steep price for doing so. Japan was forced by the US into signing the Plaza Accord and thus crippling its own economy and entering into a major recession that resulted in nearly 3 lost decades of economic stagnation and deflation that the people of Japan are still suffering to this day. The primary purpose of the Plaza Accord in 1985 was to strengthen the Japanese yen such that Japanese exports would no longer be competitive in the global market. In general, economies that are primarily driven by exports want their currency to be weaker, not stronger, so that the prices of goods are more competitive in the global market. Furthermore, the US went ahead and simultaneously placed 100% tariffs on Japanese products. Japan wasn't even allowed to match or even retaliate in any way, and this resulted in nearly double the price of finished products from Japan. This action of oppressing human advancement of another country just because you are scared of your own shadow sounds pretty pathetic, if not downright evil. So it really makes you wonder if history is just repeating itself. Now that Japan's economy has been tamed down, Japan is the cuddly teddy bear nation to the US, while China has replaced Japan as the big evil baddie. Like Japan bashing in the 1980s, China bashing today is an outgrowth of America's increasingly insidious macroeconomic imbalances. It's sad to me because modern Asian Americans are totally unaware of this. Like, they don't even know who they are.
One more question, Ms. Morita. One, how worried are you about Japan bashing in this country?
I'm very much worried about that because, as I said before, we are really partners. And bashing Japan, such a thing, maybe, again, I must say, is emotional matters. So if we have a problem, we have to look into the problem more seriously and more deeply together to solve the problem. Just emotionally bash other side is not real solution.
Do you think there's a certain element of racism in it?
Maybe, that's why I'm saying still to the American general public, Japanese looks like an alien, which fact must be changed. That's why we thought that is our responsibility. So we formed a special organization called the Council for Better Corporate Citizenship.
Despite Akio Morita's attempt to calm fear of his people, The US kept oppressing Japan's economic growth, and resentment towards the people of Japan continued to increase. I hope that you can see the similarities, in particular, the level of concern or even panic about the rise of China as an economic power in relation to Japan's economic growth in the 80s and 90s. Most Asian Americans that hold strong anti-China beliefs tend to be heavily misinformed and ignorant when you actually get into conversations with them about China. When you dig into their arguments, you'll notice a lot of it is shaped by Western propaganda, a lot of which has been debunked in one shape or another, but most of these people don't bother to do their due diligence on the matter. Just type China on Google or YouTube, and you'll soon realize that almost everything is China bashing. It's nothing but propaganda. A lot of it is just American anxiety over losing their status hegemony. One just has to do a little research to find the similarities, and if you go even deeper than that, you'll realize that the hatred towards the success of Asian people date further back. At the root of all of this discrimination is the idea of a yellow peril, which in the words of John Dower is the core of imagery of a beings who possess special powers amidst a fear of invasion from the sleeping giants of Asia. Since its inception in the late 19th century, the idea of the yellow peril has colored the discourse regarding Asian Americans and has changed back and forth from overt, racist hate to endearing terms of what Frank Chin describes as racist love. In times of war, competition, or economic strife, Asian are the evil enemy. In times of ease, Asian are the model minority, able to assimilate into American society. What remains the same is that the discrimination, whether overt or not, is always there. Just keep in mind that any criticism of Asian countries, particularly those that the government supported, will directly affect Asians all around the world. If you are Asian, you will be the target, whether the target today is Chinese or Japanese or whatever. Asian Americans must comprehend this. Asian Americans must comprehend this fact for the safety of oneself. As an African proverb once said, if we stand tall, it is because we stand on the shoulders of many ancestors, and when the roots are deep, there is no reason to fear the wind. So the next time you see or read propaganda painting China as this horrific authoritarian dystopia where governments seek to rule over everything and the people have no rights at all, remember this and reject it. I want you to take a few moments to reflect quietly on that. Is this just American anxiety that I'm being subjected to? It's nearly never the true story. China is a stunning and beautiful country that experienced colonization, which ruined its economy and the people's standard of living. When China was conquered by Western nations in the 1940s, the typical person lived only until their 30s. Today, that life expectancy is 78, which is greater than the United States' life expectancy of 76 and declining, while China's is still increasing. China went from one of the poorest countries on the planet due to Western colonialism to lifting more than 800 million people out of extreme poverty with the world's largest economy if you measure it by purchasing power. Although it is true that a portion of it is due to the fact that it is such a large country with more than 1.4 billion people. China still has a lot of room for development compared to the wealthy Western nations like the United States and other European countries. However, I must stress this to all of you. These Western nations' economies and political sway were built via centuries upon centuries of colonialism. According to Indian economist Uta Patnaik, the British Empire siphoned off more than $45 trillion in wealth from the country. That money and wealth that was extracted from colonialism was then used to industrialize and grow these economies, not to mention the other colonies controlled by Britain and other European countries. So anyway, if China is so evil, then how did it achieve what many considered the most incredible economic growth in all of human history? All of this without having to resort to colonialism, unlike the US and its European allies. China's economies did not grow as a result of colonialism. China has had to catch up economically with growth because it was a victim of colonialism as well. Not to the extent as India, But it was nonetheless largely colonized, invaded, attacked, and exploited by several foreign colonial powers. So next time you hear a story about how evil China is, maybe you should open up a history book? I think this is very important, and I think we're in a very tragic and dangerous historical moment in a new Cold War that the United States has taken with very aggressive policies against China and other nations. Numerous U.S. government officials have made it clear that they want to overthrow the Chinese government, just as the U.S. was involved in overthrowing the Soviet government in 1991, and a number of other countries. Washington and some European capitals have also imposed sanctions on Chinese companies, government officials, and different institutions, and this is all leading to a very dangerous direction. Because remember, they can't do to Japan what they can do to China. China is much more powerful. Numerous people have issued war warnings. In fact, some U.S. generals have stated openly that they are preparing to go to war with China. This is concerning because almost every issue the Western civilization has ever faced has always been answered by conflict. Just consider how many wars the US has initiated over just the past 70 years. If a war breaks out and you're Asian, if you think the racist attacks made towards Asian Americans are horrible now, wait till you see what a conflict with China can do. It will pale in comparison. All of this is incredibly unfortunate because it can be stopped, it doesn't have to happen, and I firmly think that we can foster peaceful coexistence and mutually beneficial progress. However, it's the United States that does not want peace. It always answers with wars or economic sanctions that absolutely shatters the economies of other nations, which is why BRICS emphasized de-dollarization to prevent exactly this. During the 2023 BRICS Summit, the 15th annual BRICS Summit, the president of Brazil, Lula, openly called for that, and it's still very much in the planning process. Long story short, countries are now encouraged to use their local currencies for international trade and investment. And both Brazil and Russia have confirmed that they have made plans to create a new currency, not to replace their own currencies, but a currency for international trade. Now, the BRICS leader understands this, by the way. They understand the power of sanctions, especially Xi Jinping, the president of China. This is his words at the BRICS summit translated into English. Right now, changes in the world, in our times, and in history are unfolding in ways like never before, bringing human society to a critical juncture. Should we pursue cooperation and integration, or just succumb to division and confrontation? Should we work together to maintain peace and stability, or just sleepwalk into the abyss of a new Cold War? This, by the way, is a common talking point that Xi's emphasized over and over again. The looming threat of a new Cold War that the United States has initiated. China does not want a new Cold War. This might be difficult for Americans to understand, but the only way to win is not to have war. If the two largest economies have a hot or cold war, the whole world loses. Leaders from both sides need to recognize this and focus their attention to something more important. Okay, so going back to his speech, he said, quote, "Should we embrace prosperity, openness, and inclusiveness, or allow hegemonic and bullying acts to throw us into depression? Should we deepen mutual trust through exchanges and mutual learning, or allow hubris and prejudice to blind conscience? The course of history will be shaped by the choices we make." Additionally, Xi's underlined the importance of win-win collaboration, which is a staple of Chinese politics. Growth is what people desire, not a new Cold War or a narrow exclusive bloc where only a few prosper while the majority suffer. The G7 or former colonial powers have this common idea where everyone else doesn't truly wins, only we do. And by the way, the South African people and leader Ramaphosa's understands this, which is why he emphasized that Africa should use its natural resources to benefit the development for their own economies, for their own industries, and for their own people, and not simply be a cheap resource extraction hub for Western countries and businesses. And other countries like Indonesia are aware of how crucial this is and has adopted aggressive policies to build its own domestic industries and stop the extraction and export of raw materials to wealthy imperialist nations. Indonesia has also applied to join BRICS and is most likely to do so in the future. Okay, let's get back on track. She said, and I quote, "We need to promote development and prosperity for all. Many emerging markets and developing countries have come to what they are today after shaking off the yoke of colonialism. With perseverance, hard work, and huge sacrifices, we succeeded in gaining independence and have been exploring development paths suited to our national conditions. Everything we do is to deliver better lives to our people." But, some country? Gee, I really wonder what country he's referring to. Anyway, some country are obsessed with maintaining its hegemony, has gone out of its way to cripple emerging and developing nations. Whoever is developing fast becomes its target of containment. Whoever is catching up becomes its target of obstruction. But this is futile, as I have said more than once that blowing out others' lamp will not bring light to oneself. So BRICS leaders understand this. They understand that the United States and its European allies constantly tries to contain and obstruct the development of countries, preventing them from developing and challenging the Western economic hegemony that is built upon centuries and centuries of colonialism. So I must ask you, why would I ever support a nation whose government makes every effort to impede the advancement of my people? Why would I ever support a government that makes every effort to prevent the improvement to the standard of living of my people? I'm not even Chinese. I'm half Korean, half Japanese, but even I understand that this is nothing but pure evil. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a person, a grandmother, who lived during a time when many died in their 30s or 40s. She probably didn't think she would live long enough to see her grandchildren, and now people like her are enjoying healthier and more nutritious diets. People like her are now living long enough to see their grandchildren.